We all need water. We all need water, whether it's for crops or it's for domestic water use. How that limited resource is going to be used in the future is incredibly, it's a very hot issue. There's a lot at stake here. I mean, you're talking about one of the largest, most dollar-producing industries in the United States being possibly threatened by declining water tables. You know, ag is a huge economic producer. Import, export, everything that happens for the state, let alone Midwest America, could be at stake here. I mean, we have to take it very seriously. And I think that's what a lot of the producers have started to do in this area, and especially in the Lima, is they want to be a part of the solution. They want to be a part of, we're going to act now. You know, whether it's right or wrong, or if we have to change along the way, we need to do something. We're not going to sit here and just wait for it to happen.
For Kansas History Day, we did a documentary about the Ogalalla Aquifer, which is the aquifer that is under Kansas and many other states. The History Day project has to fit a theme, and this year's theme was rights and responsibilities. Well, the problem with the Ogalalla Aquifer is that farmers are using so much of it every day that it's depleting way faster than it's recharging. So it depletes about 10 inches a year, and recharges about like 1 inch. So that's a big problem. And so in estimated about 15 to 150 years, the water will be completely depleted or it will be too low for wells.
And there's a number of adjustments farmers are making. They're changing the crops that they grow. A lot of them have installed more efficient or more advanced irrigation systems. Another thing that they're doing, they told us, is that they're reducing seed populations. So maybe they plant the same crop on the same acreage, but they plant fewer seeds per acre, so there's a smaller plant population, using less water that way. They also might reduce the acreage they're growing, so there's a number of, you know, incremental adjustments farmers seem to be making.
We talked about the sprinklers. I mean, it's pretty far out, but they were 50–60% efficient when they first started spewing water everywhere, like everybody in the cities spray waters their lawn. But now we're 95% efficient.
LEMA stands for Locally Enhanced Management Area. We currently have one LEMA in Sheridan County. It is 99 square miles, and it is a 5-year program that the producers have entered into. We did have a general consensus method of approval, and once we reached that point during years and years of community meetings, it did become state law. And once state law, they are bound to a 5-year allocation of 55 inches per irrigable acre. And that 55 inches can be used however the producer would like. So it provides a lot of flexibility for the producer to really make all of the on-site decisions themselves of how they would like to manage that limited water.
As we asked farmers, do you agree or disagree that farmers should be in charge of making their own water use decisions? And we had a split on that question, which is kind of unusual. There's about 40% of the farmers who strongly agreed or agreed with that sentiment, 40% who agreed or strongly disagreed, and there's only about 20% in the middle who were neutral. So there's a divergence of opinion on that issue.
There have been some discussions of igucas, but one of the very attractive elements of the Lima is that it is ground up. An iguca is pretty much set from the state engineer's office, whereas the LIMA is actually formulated by the general public and then submitted to the state engineer's office for approval. It then goes back and forth until completely approved, and it is assured that everything is legal and is saving water. But it pretty much assures that while you're not going to get exactly what you want, you're assured to not get what you don't want.
The big reason I wanted to be part of the LIMA in itself is just because I'm just getting my feet underneath me in my farming career, and I plan on farming for another 20, 30, maybe 40 years, however long I have. I have children that if they want to farm too, I'll be more than happy to let them. So I wanted to jump on board with it just to sustain the long-term viability so that I had the same economic chances that my dad had, his dad had, and that my children can have the same that I would have. If we don't change anything, then irrigation will eventually go by the wayside. We're never going to run out of drinking water. We never will. But irrigation will have to go by its wayside, and that's the main economic driver of our community. I would think that young farmers have a very, very different approach than the older farmers. If you talk with guys that are involved in a LIMA, a lot of the older generation that do not have a next generation to continue their farm of some sort, they are not opposed to it, but they really don't like the proposal because they're trying to make as much money as possible before they finally get out of the entity. Whereas me and other people that are younger, that are just starting to farm, if there's somebody that can help them, then they have a desire to improve the long-term sustainability, to give them a chance that they once had too.
This long-term conservation of the resource, part of probably what's in farmers' minds is that it is a collective action problem because we have this common pool and we have to make collective decisions about how we're going to set rules. So I think that's probably where that's coming from. If you leave every farmer to extract on their own without any rules, you're likely to cause one farmer is likely to impart harm on others. So we need rules. That's one way of thinking about it. On the other side of the spectrum, it's probably related to a different question we asked on the survey where we got interesting responses, which is we asked farmers, do you agree or disagree that existing environmental legislation is unfair to farmers? And there's strong agreement, actually majority agreement with that statement. A lot of farmers think that environmental legislation is unfair.
But there is a line in the sand at the end of the day that this area is in a LIMA, this area is not in a LIMA. The biggest thing that got held up with people was the boundary itself. There was very, very few, you could count them probably on one hand, the amount of people that were totally opposed to the LIMA out of everybody that was involved. The big holdup itself was that boundary in the sand. That here I am, just because I'm on the inside of the boundary, I've got to restrict my water because that's the way everything was drafted in the LIMA.
We asked farmers, do they believe that the amount of water they pump from their own well affects what their neighbors have? And there's a range of answers on that. There's a divided opinion, but in general, there's agreement with that statement. But the strength of the effect, I think, is something we didn't ask. We just asked, does it have an effect? How big the effect is, I think farmers have a lot of difficulty knowing. And it's very difficult to measure that. You can see that your neighbor is pumping water, and they have been pumping for years. You've observed on under your farm that the water table has declined. It's very hard to know how much of that decline is due to your neighbor's behavior. Yes, certainly it's true that we have this common pool effect, but how big it is depends on all kinds of factors, well spacing, the properties of the layers underneath the aquifer.
So one farmer doesn't even use the water from the Ogalalla aquifer. They just use dryland farming, so they use less water intensive and drought resistant crops like wheat. and you don't have to use all of the water from the aquifer. You can just go out there and water it every once in a while. Now, corn uses a lot of water, and that's one reason why a lot of the water is being depleted in the aquifer.
90% of our corn, if not 100% of our corn, either ends up in a cow via a feedlot, or we've got a guy about 100 miles south of here that takes it and makes competition racehorse feed out of it, and he sells it to championship quarter horses and stuff like that throughout the United States. So all of our corn will go through an animal of some sort. It never gets put on a boat and shipped anywhere. It all stays right here in the community. Our soybeans, they go down to a plant in Wichita, and they're crushed for soybean oil for biodiesel and cooking oil purposes. Our wheat predominantly gets hauled up to Omaha, Nebraska, taken to a feed mill up there where they turn it into flour, gluten, byproducts like that. And our milo, a lot of it goes to the local ethanol plant to make ethanol out of it. So that's where all of our crops go to.
A lot of people do say, you know, with corn production being so high in water use, you know, why can't you guys just switch to grass-fed beef? And there's a lot of aspects of that that pose some difficulties. A lot of that has to do with the end user and really what the market demands, what people are eating, what people want to be eating. And it has a lot to do with import and export, both from the state and from the country. When we hear, you know, just don't go grow corn, you know, there's a lot at stake there as far as the feedlots, as far as cattle production, and overall beef production. And so that would definitely take a hit. You're talking about trying to bring corn in then from other areas, so then you have transportation costs of that. But you know, is corn the future of this area? It's hard to tell. I think that you're going to see a lot of crop change just as the water table continues to fluctuate and just as technology continues to change.
Farmers have looked back, you know, if they've had a long farming career, they look back at the last several decades. What they've seen is tremendous technological advancement in how crops are grown. And for example, now with even less water, we're producing much more corn, probably double on a per acre basis, the corn that was grown a few decades ago.
When my grandpa's grandpa and his dad farmed the ground, it was your shortgrass prairies that everybody thinks of the wild buffalo roaming back in the day, that they brought into initial farm ground to grow wheat for World War I, when there was a high demand for food in World War I. Then my grandpa took over. He started more row cropping of milo at that time. They did grow corn, but they couldn't make it work at the time, so they went to milo just because of the water limiting issues that we fight. Then Dad took over. That was about the time when irrigation really got big in the 70s. And then corn became king because we could keep corn out here with irrigation water. And now as I've taken over into it, then corn has started to kind of fall back because of our water issues, and alternative crops have stepped in to replace it. So there's been a very vast change throughout just here in Sheridan County.
There are a lot of farmers who are trying to become more efficient. In the process, they still have to grow their crops so that they can make a living, but they're trying to find a new way to use it more efficiently. Now, there are also other farmers who believe that we should just use it now and just use all of it now and it'll be okay, we can just move somewhere else in the future.
With the decline of the Ogalalla aquifer, it will continue to decline even with the restrictions that we've put on. That's just the Geological Survey will tell us that. With that coming down, corn will have to go back on the back burner. I mean, that is our main economic driver of our community is corn. That has made us the most money. It hasn't this year just because of the commodity prices, but it typically makes us the most amount of money. But if you cannot grow it, then there has to be other alternative crops that'll step in. The local feed yard over here, he's a very, very progressive guy. I commend him for what he's doing. He's looking at alternative feed sources. He sees the writing on the wall. So he's got a whole conglomerate of feed yards. One of his feed yards is actually feeding milo to his cattle, because he sees the writing on the wall. Milo, I think, will become it will replace corn if we can get it to make the amount of money that corn typically would be. In Kansas, it's the wheat state. Everybody knows Kansas as the breadbasket, the wheat state. We put a ton of wheat in our rotation with the Lima and everything, so I see wheat kind of stepping back into the forerunning again. That corn will have to go out and alternative crops will come in. We'll figure out a way. I mean, a farmer is a very adaptive person. If there's a way to make $1, he'll figure out how to do it. So he will take it, and this year he might have to grow corn, next year it might be Milo. It's whatever is going to make him the most amount of money. That's what he's going to do. He's not just going to do it for practice, we call it. He's going to do it to keep his family going too, because he has to feed his family at the end of the day.
For a lot of farmers, it's a priority to use it efficiently and more important than saving it, because one of them made a point like, well, the population is going down anyway, who are we saving it for?
In the early 2000s, there was a vast outflow of people from our community. They left to go get those jobs in Denver, Kansas City, Wichita, big paying jobs like that. They've actually started to move back. A fair amount of them have started to come back. And the only reason I can think of that they would come back is just the cost of living in a big city. We have a way, way cheaper cost of living out here. They can make the same money via networking with the internet with that same company, but they have a lower cost of living, so they can take home more pay. If you'd asked me 15 years what I thought our community was going to be, I'd have said it's going to be a ghost town in 20 years. But now I've got a fair amount of friends that moved back and classmates above me and below me that are moving back too, so I'm not worried at all about our community anymore.
Probably the oldest career opportunity in the United States of America is being a part of agriculture and being a farmer, being a rancher. And that has a lot of pride attached to it. It is something that is passed down generation to generation, and it truly is something that these people know how to do, and it's all that they want to do. And protecting that is so crucial. I think a lot of times people really do consider us to be a flyover state. They really do kind of forget how important what these people are doing is to the vitality of the United States of America. And I think that sometimes these people do feel a little forgotten.
I don't think that a lot of kids in school know about this very much. It's not taught in school. We don't really talk about it ever. You know, sometimes if we're talking about the Dust Bowl and talking about now how we farm, we sometimes bring this up in like social studies, but
there was one paragraph about the Ogalalla Aquifer in the geography textbook.
One of the greatest things that Northwest Kansans really have is a want to be a part of to be included in discussions that have to do with the well-being of Northwest Kansas and the state of Kansas. You know, they want to be a part of the solution, and they want to be a part of the discussion that happens in eastern Kansas. They want to really focus on Kansas as a whole. You know, what they do out here is so important when it comes to the health of the state of Kansas.